Think about how you use the words old and young.
Right.
I feel so old. What does that actually mean? Because feeling old to me right now, it's utterly subjective. It might mean incompetent. It might mean ugly, especially for women. It might mean insecure. You can feel all those things at 13. I felt them worse then. Age has so much less to do with what we're capable of and interested in than we think it is.
From the news team at LinkedIn, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. It's our show about work on our own terms. And if you're here today in our studio, you probably are a person who thinks a lot about age and the way that age shows up for us at work, right? The thoughts that we have about how it conveys authority or does not. Whether we get to have a say in things is so often determined by the inexplicable sense that we have a right to speak, and too often, in ways that we understand and don't understand, that has to do with how old we are or how old other people perceive us to be. Ageism is this squirrely term. Mention it on LinkedIn, and immediately you grab everyone's attention. We're thinking about it. We're thinking about it a ton. So today we want to talk about it. Our guest is Ashton Applewhite, and wow, do we have a treat for you in Ashton. She is an anti-ageism activist. She has done so many incredible things in her career, but today what I want you to know about Ashton is that she is the founder of something called the Old School Hub. It is just that, the perfect place to start if you want to understand anything about ageism, how it impacts you, or how it impacts the environment in which you find yourself. And Ashton has a great book out, folks. It's called This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism. In our time together, Ashton is going to give us the language to unpack a lot of what we experience when we talk about ageism. She'll talk to us explicitly about how we can be better managers and how we can build teams that are more diverse, especially when it comes to age. Now, I originally recorded this conversation with Ashton for our premium subscribers, and there is a much longer version of this show. If it speaks to you and you are a premium member, you can find it in our show notes. But for now, I want you to summon every bias and assumption that you have about what your age means and put it up for review, because here's Ashton.
I think about ageism all the time, unlike anyone else, and I don't recommend it, but it is almost a truism that all change starts within. Everyone is biased. Most bias is unconscious, and we can't challenge something that we're not aware of. And once you see it in your own attitudes, the way your assumption that to reduce it to a truism, older is not as good as younger, then you start to see it in the culture around you. Yeah. And that is really liberating. So it is the first step to a process of realizing, oh, it's not my fault. It's not something I made. It's everywhere around us. It's real. It's harmful. And we can do something about it.
It is real, but one of the tricky things about it is a lot of us, I think, probably a lot of you folks in the chat, you suspect it, but we don't have a framework for proving it, right? So it's just this squirrely, yucky feeling.
Well, we have some tools. I mean, it is illegal.
Yes, that's true.
And more companies are getting sued for age discrimination and losing. And we have metrics, and we also know a lot about dealing with gender bias and racial bias in the workplace. Each of those is different, and each individual's experience of each of those is different, and how much they can risk, and 1,000 other situational things that are unique to them. But we have tools.
Yeah.
We have noticed, for example, when everyone in the room is a man.
Yeah.
When everyone in the room is white. So we can train ourselves, for example, to notice when everyone in the room is the same age. Because that's no more excusable. There's never a good reason for it.
Yes, that's so true. Okay. I have so many questions, but I actually want to bring in our audience here. And this question comes from Nick Patel, who is in Gujarat, India. And Nick says, how can experienced professionals actively reposition themselves without feeling the need to constantly compete with younger talent, right? You look around the room and you think, oh, that's my competition. They're going to take my job. I'm not saying you do, but let's just say it comes up.
I'm sorry.
Sure. What would you say to Nick?
Well, I have a big picture advice that is much easier, like most advice, to give than to follow, but try and strip the age away. What makes that person your competition? Besides their age, which is unfair and might be, but what can that person do that you'd like to learn how to do? What opportunity do you think they're going to get offered that you might like to get offered? And try and strip the age and maybe even the gender away from it and think, geez, if I want what I think that person is going to get, how can I position myself to learn that coding language, to update that skill, to be present ask for training, whatever it is, so that you can compete on completely legitimate grounds that really have much less to do with age than we think it does.
Yeah, so true. Nick, I hope that even begins to make you think about that. It certainly does for me. I want to bring in Janet, who is right here in New York with the two of us. Janet says, how can we turn negative self-talk into positive belief in ourselves about what we're capable of?
Well, educate yourself about age and aging, because our perceptions are so much more negative than the reality.
Yeah.
Just educating yourself simply because our baseline, our expectations are so low, improves your attitude. We know that attitudes towards aging affect not just our attitude in a job interview, but how our minds and bodies function. So it's good for all of you. And think once you start on this path, think about how you use the words old and young, right? That's a starting place. Right? I feel so old. Well, what that really means, what does that actually mean? Because feeling old to me right now, it's utterly subjective. It might mean incompetent. It might mean ugly, especially for women. It might mean insecure. You can feel all those things at 13. I felt them worse then. So try to decouple the idea that a fixed age sets a certain set of parameters for a person, because there's always people older than you that can do that thing and people younger than you that can't. So kind of detach. Age has so much less to do with what we're capable of and interested in than we think it is. And I just want to say that's a big job. It's a big ask. Relearning. I think we can learn a lot from the body acceptance movement. We live in a body that says if you are not thin and white and hopefully blonde, something is wrong with you. And we live in a culture that barrages us with messages that older is worse than younger. So unlearning is hard.
It's so powerful to begin to bring that attention to yourself, your own biases, the way that you are holding yourself back before you ever step up to the plate. So here comes another question. This one comes from Dana in Ontario, Canada. Dana says, how can we shift workplace cultures to value capability and impact over traditional markers like tenure in particular?
Well, there are very few jobs that offer real tenure. Academia is one of them. And then if, there's only a certain number of senior professors, then indeed places are limited. But one of the most pervasive myths about population aging as a whole is that older people are taking jobs away from younger people. And the reverse correlation is true. The more younger people have jobs, the more older people have jobs. We are generally not competing for the same jobs. If the only job in town is a barista, then you're going to have all ages competing for it.
Sure.
But that's not an old versus young problem. That's a labor market problem. And this scarcity thinking, right, never, ever does us any favors.
Right.
So, employers have a lot to do with that, how they can change that. And I can give you a more detailed answer, but
We'll come to that more detailed answer, but I want to bring Vanessa in. She's coming from New Jersey, and she says, and by the way, Vanessa, your question, a lot of folks have variations of this question. She says, how can senior candidates reframe their experience to be seen as indispensable rather than, I hate this word, overqualified?
Oh, overqualified. There is no such thing as overqualified. You are either qualified or you're not. So if you can say that, and I understand I can say these things and I'm not the person looking for a job. I have worked with lots of younger managers. I mean, what are the most pernicious stereotypes? That older people can't manage technology, that we're stuck in our ways, that we're not ambitious. Make it be explicit. Yeah. Say, I'm looking to do this, this is my career, it has been, and I want to build and grow. And come into it not only knowing the organization well and what they're asking for, but how you have kept those skills up, added new skills, gotten certifications, and are rocking. You are not looking to step down. Older workers, employees have less turnover, One of the myths is we just want to, clock in a few years before the proverbial gold watch. Well, who has a watch anymore, right? That we are more loyal than younger employees who, again, totally understandably are probably going to want to switch a job, more often in order to get a raise.
That's an interesting myth that doesn't actually prove out, right? Okay, so this question actually has to do with working with younger employees. And this is particularly true in some industries. I know in tech it is often true. This question comes from God Haleli Wellwort in Hesse, Germany, who says, how do I adjust to an environment where maybe my boss is 10 years younger than me and most of the employees are in their 20s?
I mean, I always think Europe does seem to be more age mixed in social life than here, but we do spend a lot of time in age silos, and that leads to the reasonable assumption that, we have things in common because we're sort of the same age, where in fact, culture, class, ethnicity, gender all have much more to do with shaping the things we actually have in common. So I would give you the very, very hard advice to try and strip that bias away and find out what that person is actually interested in or listened to last night or is watching on TV or what skill they bring to the project, and try and do it in an age-blind way. There's an experiment conducted in an orchestra in Europe, which was mostly, shocker, older white men, and they wanted to diversify. And they started conducting auditions behind a curtain. And that helped. Then they had to get a rug, so you couldn't tell what kind of shoes people were wearing. Because it wasn't until they were truly blinded, even though their desire was to hire people who were less like them. And that's how strong these biases are. So don't beat on yourself, but try consciously to think, okay, how can I strip the age of the assumption that the age it does shape events we have in common and experiences, but it doesn't shape what kind of person you are. And it doesn't shape whether you're actually going to want to hang out with them or work with them.
Look, there are two things in what you just said that feel really important to me. The first is flat out, you're not crazy.
No, it's real.
If you are feeling really different than all the people around you, that is because there is something very noticeable, and probably many things not noticeable, that is very different than people around you. But the second part of what you just said is to look for the points of commonality.
Yeah,
rather than to focus on how different everything feels, find the thing or things.
I mean, look at how much disagreements are actually about age. And of course, managers have an enormous role to play here. Where do people sit in the office? Where do people sit in meetings? And we individuals always have a role to play. Do you make a beeline for people your own age when you get in the room?
I catch myself doing it all the time. It's a function of my own insecurity. I look around and I'm like,
it's a habit. And because of ageism, we think, that young person won't want to talk to me.
That's right.
And there will be some younger people who don't want to talk to you, but that's because they're jerks, not because they're young, right? And lots of others will be interested. So try to, if you're a manager, break up the office so that not everyone is together. Make sure you have all age teams. Make sure the only after-work activity is not beer pong. Think of things. There are lots of things that all ages like to do, or they hate it. I don't want to play with kindergartners. I don't want to sing in a choir. But that's not because you're old. It's because you don't want to play with kids.
So true. Okay, this question actually comes from a headhunter, Mark Rouse in Ontario, Canada, who says, "How do I convince my clients to consider older candidates?" Sort of version of like, this is not just my problem. This is my clients.
Well, I want to say use the thousands of super convincing data points that show that older employees bring value, that age diversity. We know that diverse teams work better.
Yeah.
We know those companies are more profitable. So there's those cases. I wonder, easy for me to say, but would it be possible to do a version of that orchestra experience? I think it's important to know people's ages because they bring experience, just like I think it's important to know how old someone is if you're on a dating site, but it shouldn't be on the first page. Because the minute we have a number, all of us, me too, a bunch of assumptions that are by definition ageist because they're based in stereotypes click into place. So could he describe these people in terms of the skills they bring to the job and leave the age for page 7? I mean, I'm not saying hide the age. I'm not saying don't mention it. It's an important part of who we are.
It's getting it right, right?
It's
getting
not-
context right.
It's getting the context right. It's acknowledging, older people have more experience, but sometimes it's something I hear a lot is, the younger employees complaining that old people shoot ideas down and older people saying, oh, young people bring in these wacky ideas and we know back in, 1860 that didn't work. You need both.
Yeah.
And you need to listen respectfully. And that's where good management and facilitation comes in, and making a safe workplace culture. I mean, make sure that employees can complain anonymously
Right.
if they're hearing comments like, oh, is this your first job? Or, when are you going to retire?
Yeah.
Those are not okay any more than sexist or racist comments would be okay. So managers have a role in monitoring the culture and making sure that all ages are represented and genuinely heard.
I just want to really talk a little bit about we visited generational stereotypes. You mentioned beer pong. I should probably tell you here that my dad likes to play beer
Are you
pong.
a beer pong champion?
No, I am really not. It's not my thing. But
But that's a perfect example.
yeah.
Maybe we could make some money off your dad in covert after-work settings.
We'll talk after this.
all
I'm
right.
just saying, we got something there. Listen, I want to bring Herdis into this conversation from Brussels because Herdis asks about gender. It would be interesting to hear about how you see differences in ageism for different genders and what we can do about it.
Well, not only do we have to overthrow ageism, we have to throw out patriarchy. So big job. We're probably not going to finish it this morning. But there's a researcher named Amy Deal who has done terrific research around this. I simplify it to the maddening fact that women are never the right age. First, we are in the workforce, right? First, we are too sexy. So then we're not only, sexualized and patronized for that to be taken seriously, right? As a young woman, it's very hard.
Yeah.
And then you become too fertile. You might start a family, and we all know that your uterus and your brain cannot work at the same time. We know that men get raises when they say they're starting families, and women are often demoted. And then, boom, you're not sexy or fertile anymore, and that's all she wrote. And these are, it's incredibly stupid. There is no evidence that, there is, I don't like to ever say one gender or one age is better, but massive amounts of information that show that women are as good or better managers, et cetera, as older people. So the costs of this bias, gender bias and age bias, and they do combine in the workforce, are, they're punishing to women, they're punishing to families, and they're terrible for, corporations and organizations that want to get stuff done.
Well, listen, this question comes from Morella in Ontario, Canada. And I really have this question myself, Morella, so I'm glad you asked. It's about language. She wants to know, what language should we incorporate to avoid ageism for ourselves and our clients?
That's a great one. Language is a moving target. So some language that you like, another person may not like. I have solved this problem, though. It's the one problem I have solved in 20 years plugging away on this.
Okay.
When I was writing my book, I got literally tired of typing older people or older Americans, and I started talking about olders and youngers. And a solution to using the word generation itself or labeling generational labels is just talk about older people and younger people, because it's always accurate and it is genuinely inclusive. A 5-year-old will assure you that she is older than her 3-year-old brother.
You've been talking to my kids.
At 72, I'm now more and more the oldest person in the room. But if I'm visiting a senior center, I'm younger. So just talk about younger people. Talk about mixed age. Talk about crossing age divides and avoid labels entirely.
I love that.
Avoid the word generation if you can.
Okay, this question comes from Lisa McGuire in Georgia. Thank you, Lisa, who says, how can we create environments where the multiple generations can see, yes, the word generations,
we all have the habit.
Can see the value of being curious about what each brings to work?
Wow, that's a big one. Yeah, and think about how the question changes if you say we're people of all ages. See the value of each of us. I think one way to do it is to mix. This is, again, a big answer, but I'm sort of in the big answer business. If we don't have relationships with people who are different from us in age, it's much easier for stereotypes to persist. Just like if you don't have queer friends, it's easier to accept stereotypes about gay people and people of color and people from other countries, et cetera. So cultivate friendships, go out and meet some older or younger people. Don't stay home just because you'll stand out. You can't just grab a young person and say, hey, let's hang out. But think of something you like to do.
Yeah.
And find a mixed age group to do it with. If you are on a team and everyone's the same age, if you're in a position to talk to your manager or to make that happen yourself, to be deliberate about bringing in people of different ages, as we have learned to do, I think, around people from different backgrounds and of different races.
I so appreciate that. This is a question that comes from Brian Lilly in Colorado. Brian says, what are some practical strategies for challenging age-related biases, both for individuals facing them and for leaders looking to create a more age-inclusive culture? I'm just going to say this is a question we keep coming back to and touching on and coming back to and touching on.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very big question. It does start with the assumption in the person that their age is age rather than experience, right? If you have learned something particular, bring that up and the value that it brings. If you have worked with all ages or have had a manager who was your kid's age and you got along great, say so and question in ourselves, in yourself, the assumption that an age difference is the reason there's a problem or that you're going to encounter a difficulty. There was a study where a bunch of retirees in Berkeley were paired with a bunch of students. I don't know if you've heard about this. And it sort of got onto rocky ground because the older people weren't responding to texts, and the younger people got pissed off because that seemed disrespectful. And it was a cultural difference. These older people had not, when they were in the workforce full time, they weren't texting. And after work hours meant after work hours. So they'd get the text and say, okay, I'll get to that in the morning. And the younger people came from a different culture where it's, if I'm texting you, I need an answer. But it's not about values. It's not about old people being stupid and resistant to change. It's not about young people being rude and on their phones all the time.
Right.
It's about needing to identify shared goals. We want this project to get out the door, and talking about, how to make it happen. And the problem got resolved through just basic conflict resolution stuff. And I mean, maybe this is cheesy, but empathy, right? God knows we need it now more than ever. And Amy Deal, who is a leadership expert, she said when she finds herself making a stereotype or an assumption. And this is fundamental. Age is often much less relevant than we think it is. Sometimes it's relevant. But are you making an assumption on the basis of age or a judgment? And she says, she sits back and says, I was that person or I will be that person. We are all on this journey called aging. Everyone is aging. It's not something sad that old people do.
That was anti-ageism activist Ashton Applewhite. You can check out more of her work in her book, This Chair Rocks. Love that name. Also, you can find a lot of materials on the website Old School Hub. I feel totally pumped after talking to Ashton, right? Just exuberant about the potential for a truly diverse workforce. And I also feel prepared for a reality that matches more of my experience and the experience that a lot of you all tell us that you have all of the time. I felt like Ashton had some really great advice for those of us who are, in particular, actively in the workforce right now, right? She suggests that we have the opportunity here to frame our own narratives as we're out talking to people about jobs, to essentially predict the biases they may have about us because of our age, either that we're too old or too young, and steer our stories to address those biases. She talks, for example, if you're an older candidate, about arriving at an interview and describing yourself as a very curious person interested in new technologies by naming something that people maybe assume that older folks are not great at. You have the opportunity to define your narrative for yourself, and there's power in that. There's so much more practical advice for those of us who are confronting ageism in any way in our work environment. And often the best resource for that advice is, you guessed it, us, this community. This week, as usual, our senior producer, Sarah Storm, and I will host office hours on Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll go live from the LinkedIn news page. You can join us and talk in the comments, ask your questions, Better yet, give your advice. If you haven't joined us, well, let this be your first time. We would really love to have you. Now, if this episode struck a chord for you, please text it to a friend, someone who needs it. For now, I'm Jessi Hempel. Thanks for joining us this week. I'll be right back here next Monday.